Welcome to Biz Wire. We lead off today with China's new leaders who are planning a system of national residence permits to replace the household registration or hukou regime. Now, this is seen as a vital reform that will boost China's urbanization campaign and drive consumption-led growth. The hukou system, which dates to 1958, has split China's 1.35 billion people along urban and rural lines, preventing many of the roughly 800 million Chinese who are registered as rural residents from settling in cities and enjoying basic urban welfare and services. For years, critics have called for changes, and a government researcher told Reuters that a unified national residence permit system would be adopted as policy as part of a 10-year urbanization plan to be published after the current annual session of Parliament. Benefits and entitlement under the new system are expected to be, according to the researchers, basically equal, although the changes would be eased in slowly. Previous administrations have experimented with reform on the fringes of hukou for years, but have not delivered on calls to overhaul the system, which affords services to people based on where they live, like health insurance, retirement pension, and schooling. In a speech to the Chinese parliament on Tuesday, outgoing Premier Wen Jiabao said hukou reforms should be accelerated to drive an urbanization effort that he said would underpin economic development. While it's easier said than done, Wen Jiabao did say that to advance urbanization, the government should register eligible rural workers as permanent urban residents and expand the coverage of basic public services in urban areas to migrant workers. In his final government work report as premier, Wen also advised the new government to keep megacities like Beijing and Shanghai and large cities like Hangzhou and Nanjing at an appropriate scale to drive development of surrounding areas and strengthen the ability of small and medium-sized cities to develop industries, provide public services, and increase employment. Hukou reform and the drive for urbanization go hand in hand, and Zhang Ping, head of the National Development and Reform Commission, China's main economic planning agency, said on Wednesday that guidelines for the urbanization plan would be launched in the first half of this year. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, in 2012, China's urban population expanded to 52.5% of the population and is expected to rise above 53% this year. Bill Bishop of the Sinocism newsletter writes that money, resources, and bias towards rural residents are some of the major obstacles to changing the hukou system. The Wall Street Journal reported that the State Council's Development Research Center, a government think tank, estimates that the price tag for turning one rural migrant into an urban citizen is about $13,000. That means the costs of providing education, healthcare, and pensions to even 10% of China's 200 million or more migrant workers is roughly $260 billion, equivalent to about 3% of 2012 GDP, though the figures would be much lower if pension payments were delayed. Rural children are often victims of the hukou system, either by being left behind in their villages while their parents go to work in the cities, or by joining their parents and either attending expensive, ill-equipped schools or no school at all. Migrant workers have for years lamented inequalities in the hukou system, like the lack of local medical coverage or equal access to education. Urbanization will have many effects that we won't realize until they are upon us. For example, Professor Jeremy Wallace of Ohio State University says that for non-democratic regimes since World War II, large cities are more likely to be the locations of protests, and even more ominously from a regime perspective, governments with large cities tend to survive for shorter periods of time. Well, social and political stability has been and remains the Communist Party's #1 priority, with economic development a mere extension of that goal. China plans to spend $6.4 trillion to bring 400 million people to cities over the next decade as the new leadership seeks to turn China into a wealthy world power with economic growth generated by affluent consumers. A hukou reform could give a major boost to domestic consumption, as migrant workers tend to not integrate into the cities they work in and save most of their income in case of a medical emergency or for their children's education. If workers felt more secure, they might be encouraged to spend more and gradually become part of the city community instead of making up what has become a huge underclass population and a source of worry for those in power.